Now let's continue down this road of Midwestern Indiana. But instead of exploring the miles and miles of beautiful cornfields, let's go underneath Indiana. I'm talking into the sewer system. I'm talking about a movie called Twice Under. This movie was released in 1989 and is directed by Dean Crow, the same director as the Indiana set wooded slasher melodrama Backwoods, which I covered in the first video. With Twice Under, Crow I feel grows in his visual strength because he trades the woods for the deep, dark sewer system of Indiana, which I could only imagine was a huge challenge for filming. The plot revolves around a crazed Vietnam veteran who begins killing people in the sewer system, all while he is intending to enact vengeance on an ex-squad member. The main character is essentially the ex-squad member's son, who attempts to save his dad from the killer. This movie throws you right into it. With the opening sequence involving these two sewer workers, it legitimately creates a good amount of atmosphere and tension, switching back and forth from what certain characters can see and not see, and what the killer can see with a pair of night vision goggles. I really can only imagine how challenging it must have been to film with these sewer systems, and to try to create a sense of location of where everyone is at and where the killer is. After the fantastic opening scene, we then transition to the main character and his dad. It plays out like you would imagine, with the father warning his son of this incoming threat from his past. Then the movie takes a turn. I won't go into it exactly, but it's a turn that genuinely took me by surprise and upped the stakes a bit. Unfortunately, it doesn't commit to this turn towards the end, which I kind of found disappointing. I think Crow's core strength as a director is creating a dramatic through line while embedding it in a horror movie scenario. It's apparent in Backwoods, and it's apparent here. Now, just from the surface level enjoyment of Twice Under, I did find this movie very slow in its middle. With Backwoods, it also has that slow part in the middle, but Crow is able to balance that out with some genuinely out there performances and scenes. In Twice Under, once a certain turn happens, the character that it switches to is unfortunately just kind of boring, which makes it sag towards the middle. While earlier I did praise the use of location, the downside to the underground location is the fact that it does kind of take away to that Midwest feel, because these sewers could honestly be anywhere. Chicago, New York, anywhere. By no means do I think this should be used against the movie. I'm mainly just talking about the movie in terms of the canon of the Indiana feel. It's a give and a pull in the end. When comparing this movie to Crow's last movie, it is really interesting in my mind. More so in the behind the scenes and the opening than the bulk of the movie. Now let's go from the depths of Indianapolis and go all the way up to Gary, Indiana, with Original Gangstas, directed by Larry Cohen and starring Fred Ward, Pam Grier, and Jim Brown. Not to mention supporting roles from Paul Winfield, Richard Roundtree, Robert Forrester, Charles Napier, and even Wings Hauser. I can't even believe that this is a movie that exists, let alone was shot in Indiana, which means all these amazing actors were here at one point. This is essentially the team-up movie for many great actors of the 70s exploitation genre, a genre which is one of my all-time favorites. The plot here is fairly simple, with Fred Williamson's character, with the help of Grier, Brown, and Winfield, are seeking revenge against gangs in Gary, Indiana. I find it so fascinating that Cohen decided to take his last theatrical movie and set it in the crime-ridden town of Gary, Indiana, but not only set it, actually film in it, which is why I think Cohen is such a maverick director. Last year, I made it a point to watch more of his movies, and just from doing that, I grew such an appreciation for him as both a director and especially as a writer. The stories that he would tell and the crazy things he would do just to get a couple shots. He chooses to open the movie up with narration that describes why Gary, Indiana ended up the way it did, which I think was a great tone setter. Before long, we're dropped into the central plot and introduced to all of our characters. Just seeing these actors together on screen is so fun in and of itself. Now, from time to time, you're reminded of these actors are not their younger selves. They move slower and they hit slower. At a certain point, I got used to this, and in fact, I think the downside to this movie is that initial beginning and middle chunk. It starts out strong, but then almost immediately starts to slow down in pace, and it kind of veers into the boring side with our characters talking about how bad everything is, but it does gradually get better as more urgency is given to our central characters. It all culminates with the three leads battling this gang. Probably the most impressive thing that I saw during this were the multiple explosions. They are huge, and you can see people standing right next to them. Knowing Cohen, this fits right into the run and gun style of it. For a person from Indiana, this makes the movie so much more interesting for me, especially finding all the odd underground things that were shot here. In terms of these series of videos, I love doing them, especially when I stumble upon something that has some fascinating elements, like Original Gangstas or the amazing and wonderful Terror Squad. There are way more movies that I'm eyeing for this section. I definitely want to stick to things that are more under the radar though, because I could talk endlessly about probably the most famous Indiana movie, Breaking Away. That has become one of my favorite movies and is something that has really changed with me from when I first saw it when I was 15 versus in my 20s now. But I just love searching for those smaller little gem items that were made right here in the Midwest.